listening to Fucks Given, the one with Diggory and Kate. Hi, Ree.
Hello.
Oh, wait.
Fancy seeing you here.
What? You're in my flat?
I know, I'm at yours. I don't think we've ever recorded a podcast with one mic like this before.
No, we haven't.
In the same
ever.
place. Yeah. This is mad. We had technical issues at my house. My internet's down. Mm-hmm. So I hopped on my bike, quickly cycled over here. We had a whole debacle with the bloody
Headphone
splitter.
Luckily, shout out to my neighbour who had one.
Yeah, thanks neighbour. Saved our skins. So yeah, we are in the same place. And we've got a really exciting guest on today. 2 guests.
We do. We have Diggory and Kate who have their own podcast called The Real Sex Education. And it's called that because it is literally a son and mother who is a sex therapist.
So Florence, what was your sex education like back at school?
I don't remember too much of it, to be honest. I missed the lesson where you learnt to put on a condom, which I feel like was the most informative lesson that you could learn in sex education at that point.
It's the most memorable one.
Yeah, maybe I was just like, damn it, I missed out. And then I never felt confident about putting condoms on.
Oh, maybe, yeah. Because I always thought that you don't really learn a hell of a lot when you put on a condom because you're just laughing and taking a piss all the time. So yeah, putting on a condom correctly is important, especially when you're like, drinking.
Definitely. Yeah, I always got other people to do it because I just didn't know. I didn't really learn anything else from sex education at school. It was just... I got told about STIs and stuff.
Yeah, I feel like it was a lot of scaring.
Yeah.
Back then it was very much like, if you have sex, you will get pregnant, you will get STIs. There was a lot of still a lot of shame involved. And it was very clinical. It was very biological,
yes.
And I just remember how awkward our teachers were. And what worst thing I remember is toxic shock, having a whole big assembly about toxic shock syndrome from... tampons. And
that
again,
is so unfair.
Yeah, toxic shock is still rare. It doesn't happen often. It happens, of course. And I remember just being terrified of tampons because of that reason. And
I would have been as well.
Terrified about accidentally leaving it up there. And I've had anxiety before. I've literally been in the middle of having sex and started crying because I've suddenly imagined that I've got a tampon stuck up there.
That assembly scarred me for life. I can't believe they did that in an assembly as well, not even just a classroom.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I was in an all-girls school, so I think it was just a big toxic shot, and something big must have happened. Maybe someone had died, but...
That's so interesting. I wonder what the difference is between going to a mixed school, because I went to a mixed school.
Yeah.
And, everyone just took the piss during sex education. Yeah. It was never taken seriously.
I don't think it makes a difference whether you're in a mixed school or not with sex ed. I feel like you're just going to be awkward and cringy, and, there's going to be bullying that happens. There's going to be, piss taking. I've got no idea whether or not being in a all-girls or all-boys school or in a mixed school actually makes a difference. What I would... say is that it's probably really complicated if you have, if you're not born a man or a woman, if you're questioning your gender, I think that's complicated.
That's the biggest thing, I think, about sex education back in the day.
Oh,
it was
yeah.
so heteronormative.
Yeah.
I grew up in Brighton, and yet they said nothing about gay sex.
Really? Oh, no, you know what? Neither did my school. I don't know why I'm so shocked. None of them fucking did.
It's ridiculous.
It's
the gay capital of the UK, and they didn't even teach, anything other than straight sex.
Yeah, that's mad.
And P and V. Yeah. And, no pleasure, nothing, no consent.
No pleasure. There was nothing pleasurable about our sex education. I remember when the first sex education I ever had was in primary school. I think I was about 11. And I remember watching a woman giving birth.
Wow.
At 11 years old.
Why to scar you?
Why are you showing us this video? What purpose does that have? I don't understand.
Yeah.
And it was graphic. It was
I don't know if I've ever seen that,
Even seeing that now at my age, I'm still a bit fucking hell, It's a big deal. Showing an 11-year-old of mixed children.
Oh my God.
I don't know. I think that we need some heavy changes in the UK, and the UK is one of the best places for sex ed.
Yeah.
One of them. I'm not saying it's the best.
Yeah.
Compared to the rest of the world, we need to be in like Scandinavia. That the Netherlands teach sex education as young as 4 years old. And again, we're not talking about sex and we're talking about age appropriate sex education, where it's talking about consent and bodies and changes and, you know, whether or not you feel comfortable getting hugged by an aunt, you can say no. And that just like, I mean, that's what we need to have over in this country. In all countries, it needs to start at that age.
Yeah.
And talking about gender and sexuality and consent is the fucking main one.
The main one. So I guess having a sex therapist as a mum means that you had like personalized sex education.
Well, you'd hope so, or would it go the opposite direction? This is something I would really like to ask them. You know, how was it growing up with a mum that's a sex educator? Do you hear it and then you go the opposite direction and you don't want to listen and it's horrible and you can't handle it until you get to a certain age where you're like, actually, I do respect this. This is like really valuable information.
Yeah.
So we all cringe if our parents talk to us about sex.
Oh my God, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, let's find out what they have to say. Let's bring them on.
Oh, snap.
Hi both, welcome to Fox Given. How are you both?
Hello, thank you so much for having us.
Hi, great to be here.
So we were just pre-talking about you coming on, and we're so excited because we are massive fans of the show Sex Education, and you guys, I feel like the show was based on you.
Yeah, it's got to be. You must have been the inspiration.
Yeah, there's a lot of people saying that actually.
Did you start the podcast after watching that show together?
We did.
Well,
we didn't watch it together
sort of.
though. Yeah. We there are a lot of striking similarities, but yeah, I think basically once we'd seen the TV show, we were like, hang on a minute, this is us. And then we knew there's an appetite.
Cash in that cash cow.
Exactly. You know, people, there's an appetite for it. Then we thought, well, we'll do the podcast. Yeah.
Nice. What influenced you both to start your podcast?
We were, I mean, it is very similar to what happened in our real life. I mean, Diggory was giving advice based on what I'd told him,
Nice.
what he'd asked me. He'd come and say, he was giving advice to his friends at school. Yeah, that happened.
Yeah, and I kept going back. Yeah. So I kept going in and being like, Mum, I have a friend who's got this thing going on. I've got a friend who's got, and then I think after a while, Mum was a bit like, okay, he's got a lot of problems. Because when someone comes up to you and goes, oh, I have a friend who, you're always like, yeah, whatever, your mate who has what,
Yeah,
you
it's
know.
just you, yeah.
But when I started coming to Mum and being like, oh, I have a friend who's got a, woman body part, Mum was a bit like, hang on, this doesn't work out. I know you had a lot of problems, but he doesn't have a vagina. So, that's when I was asking my friends who were girls. And then she got a bit like, but yeah, and then I think she realised I was being genuine and I was actually just going to school and telling all my friends how to do this, that, and the other. It's crazy.
That's incredible. I mean, Mum, round of applause, because you are doing the good right there.
Yeah.
We wondered if growing up with a mum that was into this stuff, that had all that sex educational background and knowledge, were you as welcoming, or was it like, did you go through a phase where you're like, Mum, stop, I don't want to know, or like how did you feel about it?
I don't know. I feel like it's never
Long pause.
Yeah. I feel like it's always it's a tough one because like it was always just something that like was just discussed around the dinner table and wasn't weird. Like it almost like you'd see the news on TV, like stuff about politics would come up. Like a lot of sex stuff does just come up in the news, and a lot of sex stuff is just like I mean, I could list off loads of things at the moment, in Parliament, terrible, but otherwise, so a lot of it comes up, and so like naturally these conversations come up, and if you talk about it in a matter-of-fact way, it's not that bad, and it's not, and it was never too intrusive. Mum wasn't ever being like, so have you got any girlfriends? What are you doing? That sort of thing. Actually, she probably was. But I didn't have. But I never felt like I had to be like, Mom, no, shut up.
Yeah, that's good. I think a lot of people growing up have that awkward experience with their parents about talking about sex, and I think you must have avoided it because it was just already part of the conversation. It was so natural. It wasn't like, right, now I need to talk to you about the sex, and both people don't want to do it. If it's part of the conversation, it becomes part of you and your identity and your being, and it's just like, it's just there.
I have realised that we have jumped straight into this conversation without actually introducing you guys properly.
That's our bad. So sorry.
For the curious fuckers, would you be able to introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you both do?
I'm Diggory Waite, and I don't really do much else but this podcast with my mum called The Real Sex Education, I co-present that with mum.
Nice.
Who is Kate Campbell, a sex and relationship therapist.
Amazing.
Yeah. So hence we are The Real Sex Education, because this is the real life version of the Netflix series.
Beautiful. And how did you go? What was your journey like, going from who you were to being a sex and relationships therapist? That must have been a big, I don't know, lots of qualifications, or did you have to go through uni? Like,
Yes. Yeah, all
we're
of
going to
that.
be taking notes.
No, I sort of, I kind of got to the age where the children were getting a little bit bigger and thought it would be quite fun to do, and just went and did it. And it does lots of qualifications, and then I started teaching and supervising other therapists. So I've been doing it for quite a while now, and it just keeps on growing. So it's a lot of fun.
Was it inspired by your own sex education or lack of? What was the kind of push and drive behind sex?
So I started out as a relationship therapist, just because I thought it would be interesting. And then somebody said, "Oh, would you like to do the sex therapy training?" And I thought, a bit weird. Give it a go. And the rest is history. Yeah, it just sort of grew from there. Yeah. And you were at Diggs was about 7 or 8.
Wow, that young. Christ.
What did you think about your mum doing that?
I don't think he quite knew at that stage exactly what it was.
Yeah. Well, I think whenever the film Meet the Fuckers came out, that's when I sort of got an understanding. Because I think the mum in that is a sex therapist. So whenever that came out, I must have been like, maybe I was like 9 or 10, and I was like, that's what mum does. And my mum's mental as well. So that was good. And that's probably when I used to go to school and I'd tell my friends about it, and they'd all be like, that's crazy. And so, yeah, I was on board with it straight away. People sort of found it fun, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, when he went to secondary school, he moved over to secondary school, and I thought, oh, it's so great the way he's settled in. He's got so many friends coming home for tea. All these little boys were coming home for tea, and I thought it was wonderful. And then they'd sort of come into the kitchen and go, "Are you a therapist?" And I'd say, "Yes," and they'd go, "Ah!"
I love it.
Oh, that's so funny.
That's so cute.
That's actually like a lot different to what I thought it would be, because I think like there's a sort of stereotype of kids just being like, oh, that's like, it's embarrassing.
Yeah.
Like, but it's interesting that they were all actually really intrigued.
And we don't have anything. I mean, it's not like Sex Education, the series, with sort of dildos lying around and things like that. It's a normal house. So it wasn't. There weren't all those sex objects around the place. Although there were a lot of books and perhaps pictures, certainly on the computer. I used to have pictures of body parts and things, drawings of vaginas and penises cut and sort of on as a screensaver. And I'd forget they were there, and people would walk past and sort of go, I'd be really intrigued.
That must have been like free porn for you, Diggory.
Oh.
Imagine that's his porn, really?
Yeah, I love scientific cross sections of penises and vaginas. I'm like, yes, that's very much my vibe. It's almost a fetish, actually. I need it. I need it. Yeah.
Yes. You know what? Not to kink shame, not to fetish shame. It
Absolutely
could be.
not.
I mean,
Could be.
yeah, I love a bit of medical play.
Yeah, that must have really informed your own sex education, though. How was your experience of sex education?
Mine. It was. I think it's at school. It was all. I mean, that's part of the reason. Again, on the podcast, I feel like at school it's all extremely. It's all scientific, which, as we know, is my fetish. So obviously, I loved it. But I think for a lot of people, it's it's a bit boring and not very helpful. I think the good thing about Mum definitely as well is that she's a sex and relationship therapist, and also she's just a counsellor in general. So like, so much of this. Well, obviously, we talk about sex and stuff, but so much of it, the underlying and probably like the iceberg kind of thing, a lot of it is the person-to-person stuff that's actually going on around it, and maybe it's the stuff of the self that's going on at the same time. So actually, yeah, I think my sex education was probably, it was massively supplemented by that side of it. Like, whilst everyone else was just getting scientific, I was getting a bit more of like the real life bit. And again, that's what we try to do with our podcast. Like, we try and give people a real life understanding of it, but also give them advice and stuff that you can actually use in real life, rather than just being like, oh, I know what a fallopian tube is. It's like, how useful is that really? You know.
Are there any topics on your podcast that you don't talk to each other about? Are there any like things that, like, stories, personal stuff?
What's off limits?
Wow.
There's not much personal stuff, is there? Really?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think that's probably I think that's what people like to. I think that, and to be fair, I think there's part of us where we're like, right, if people think that it's a mum and son talking about their own personal sex lives on a podcast, people will be like, whoa, that sounds amazing. But I think, like, we have to remember that we are a mum and son, and if I can be quite frank, I think it'd be fucking weird. I don't want to tell her about my sex life, and I certainly don't want to hear about hers. So I think that's how we're going to keep playing it. But you know, every now and then, like, some personal stories will slip in here and there, I think, but for the most part, I think we again, it's like when we were younger, we talk in general about sex, but there are certain things, like when we did our episode on pegging, like I was a bit like, this is a bit worrying, because it's quite, there's a lot, exactly. And but you know what, again, this is why she's just an absolute professional. Like, I was more worried, I think, than she was, and then we got on the call, and it was great, and she was asking loads of questions and being all normal, which is why I don't know why I'm surprised. This is her job, but I thought I was way more squeamish than she was. So yeah.
No, it's worse actually talking to a young man who's talking about how much he enjoys pegging in front of my son. With my son is a little bit awkward. But I mean, we are only talking about a really, really normal thing. I mean, I don't know how normal pegging is. How normal is it? Well, I mean, you know, it is normal, but sex is normal, and how common it is, and pegging is relatively normal. And what underlines an awful lot of people's sexual problems is actually fear or bad shame. Experiences. Yeah, exactly. And so I went off and trained as a trauma therapist as well. Wow. To help with that, because actually that's what a lot of people are bringing. So I always make the assumption when I meet people that they've had bad experiences, and that goes for the people on the podcast as well. So we proceed with caution, because we don't want to do them any harm either. Yeah. Because you never know. You never know what you're dealing with. Yeah.
Diggory, do you feel like you and your relationships now, do you feel like, I don't want to be like more advanced than other people's relationships that you're hearing, but do you get a lot of people coming back to you and sort of saying like, wow, this is an experience I've never had before, or like, no, that's not what I mean, more like like the communication level of it. Do you are you elite, basically, is what I'm asking?
Because your mum's a sex ed.
Yeah, because you've done this.
It's so funny, on my Hinge profile, to get it out of the way, I've just put on there that I have a sex podcast with my mum, and it's funny because every now and then,
that's smart.
I mean, because let's be real, like, if they're not going to be happy with it, if they see it on the profile, then they're never going to be happy with it. So you might as well just get it out of the way. And I have had a few people, like, as their first message to me, be like, so if you've got a sex podcast, does that mean like you're really good at sex? And there's not really many ways to respond to that, other than you'll have to come and find out, which also is interesting.
I love it.
But no. But I think, is it? Would I say it's elite? I'm not sure. To be fair, I mean, I don't know. I sometimes when you're honest and it comes across like you're being big-headed. But I do remember one person to me. I think the biggest piece of actually feedback I feel like I've got is people go to me. You know, I never speak about sex with anyone that I like, with someone this much. Because I love talking about it, clearly, because I talk about it with my mum all the time. Like, I clearly love talking about it. And so, I mean, I remember one girl in particular, she was like, I've never spoken about sex with someone before I had it with them, which is a crazy thing to think. But also, I think really is quite common.
Poor girl.
You know what I mean? Yeah. And so, And
I don't think it is that common. I think maybe in our space it is, and we
Yeah,
do that.
exactly,
But I think most people don't. I think they're terrified to talk about it. Even it's like what the talking about it before, during, and after, and a lot of people don't do any of that. There's no sex debrief, and that's just so important. I mean, Kate, I'm sure that you are elite because of the way that you have learned how to communicate, and you have those conversations, and you're there. I mean, I can ask you that same question. Are you elite in the bedroom? Is that?
No, but funnily enough, I mean, what's something we talk about on the podcast an awful lot is that in sex therapy, when people start, we actually stop them from communicating. So when they're doing experiments, touching each other and things, we tell them initially not to talk to one another about what's going on, because then that closes down the fear, because while you're wondering what the other person's thinking, and you're thinking, do they like this, and you're looking at them and you're saying, oh, they're enjoying this, is this good, should I do more of this, while you're doing that, you're not concentrating on your own experience. And then an awful lot of people don't have that much sexual pleasure. You know, they get aroused, they orgasm, but they don't know what goes on in between, because they're so busy worrying about their response, trying to please the other person with their orgasm, or trying to make the other person orgasm. And they're not having that much fun. So while I would absolutely wholeheartedly agree that you need to talk about sex before you get down to it, once you do sex therapy exercises, you stop talking, which is sort of counterintuitive, but really, really works, because you end up then focusing on your own experience and really starting to get into your own body and enjoy your pleasure.
Yeah, I think one of the best sex techniques I was taught in sex therapy when I went with my ex was I kept, pestering them, wanting sex from them. And then the sex therapist said, well, don't have sex this week. You're not allowed to have sex. I think it was like for the next week or 2 weeks. And that changed everything. It was I was shocked at how much of a difference it was, and how turned on and sexual we were, because sex was taken out of the equation.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. Wait, so if you're not communicating during the sex, then when is the good time to sort of debrief what happened?
You don't. I mean, while you're in sex therapy, or certainly when you're in sex therapy with me, you don't talk at all, except in sessions where I'm present and I tell you what to do. So it's the weirdest thing. It's so weird to have some bloody woman saying, right, you can do this, you can do that, but you can't do this and you can't do that.
Wow.
And that's literally it. And then at some point, once they've mastered just thinking about their own experience, and they genuinely have mastered that, then they kind of move on and start having, a bit more communication, a bit more about what they like and don't like, a bit more, but baby steps, and then eventually there's mutual touch and it's all systems go. But it happens very organically from that base. And one of the things about imposing a sex ban is that then you have to talk about what you can do rather than what you can't do. So that creates really good communication, because if you have a sex ban, then you have to say, okay, so we need to talk about what is actually banned. And what we can do. Can we still kiss? Can we still hold hands? Can we still cuddle? Can we have a bath together? What can we do? And suddenly you're having much more touch, because there isn't that fear, oh, is this going to lead to something? Oh, is this going to be disappointing? Am I going to fail? What's going to happen? And you get really horny, because, it's off the table.
Yeah. Oh, Diggory, you look so impressed with your mum as well when you're
so
when
proud.
She's spilling the really good advice. You're like, yeah, that's my mum.
I am.
The pride there is beautiful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny. Mum has said that a few times on our podcast as well, and every time I'm like, what do you mean you impose a sex ban to reintroduce sex? But then the more she talks about it and explains it, you're like, well, yeah, that makes total sense, and I love it, and I'm sure it helps a lot of people.
Yeah, my mind's kind of blown about that whole concept, because I guess I'd never really thought about it that way, in terms of just you being your kind of vulnerable selves, just bodies together exploring and not putting too much of your mind in it, but really just leading with your body.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to teach some people to get back into their bodies, because they're so in their heads, and so you have to actually do exercises to re-enter your body, which is amazing. I didn't realize you'd had sex therapy. I'm so impressed. That's brilliant. How was it?
I mean, I'm we're both massive on therapy anyway. I think been seeing a therapist for fucking years
Yeah,
now.
good.
And then when my ex and I were going through a tough time, we went and saw a sex therapist. I don't know 100% if it worked, because I feel like it was already towards the end of our relationship, and it was just me nagging, which is not fair. Not fair. I mean, I've learned now not to nag about sex, because it doesn't work. It's actually, does the opposite effect.
Yeah.
Not communicating properly. But there was a lot of interesting stuff that we did learn. And for a time, it did help our intimacy. Maybe not necessarily our sex, but definitely the intimacy part. We found new ways to be intimate with each other that wasn't sex. And that was fast, like, just sitting in bed and him reading a book to me, because I'm dyslexic. So having someone read a book to me, I'm like, whoa, okay. It was really fascinating. But I mean, I would love to go back. I love couples therapy. I love sex therapy. I think it's fascinating. Doesn't matter what you do or how much you think you know, there will always be more to learn.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we love what we do here.
Absolutely.
We love doing fucks given.
I've learned something new today.
Yeah.
I didn't even think about any of that really when it came to sex. But talking about learning new stuff, what is like the biggest thing that you've learned from each other from doing the podcast?
Nice question.
Oh, wow.
I've learned lots from Dix. I mean, I think one of the great things about this is that we're different generations with different experiences. And he tells me all kinds of things that I don't know about young people and phrases and expressions and things. And it doesn't matter how much you watch TikTok or podcasts or whatever you do, unless you understand it, it doesn't really make sense. So he's just full of information from that point of view. Also, he disagrees with me about so much, so that's quite useful.
Love it, the conflict.
Yeah,
exactly.
different point of view.
Hopefully it's like a competitiveness where like I'm hopefully like making you your best that way, but actually I think I'm just quite annoying. It's because I'm trying to fully understand what you're saying. And again, when you say things like let's impose a sex ban to have sex again, I'm like, how does that work? But eventually we get there. I think
eventually.
Yeah, well, no, it's because I can't understand as well. When you were saying that earlier about having someone read to you, I'm also dyslexic. When you were talking about learning, I was like, I might have to add that as a thing on my field profile that I just want someone to read to me, because there's another dyslexic. That is great. That'd be nice.
Yes.
But
on field
Burglar
as
Bill.
well. It's all the sex educators that are on field, I swear.
Literally.
Exactly. Well, actually, to be fair, I'm yet to dive in yet. I'm too scared, but I will at some point, I'm sure. Like I need to do that.
You can do it.
Yeah, no,
It's
I'm
beautiful.
sure. Yes. But what have I learned from Mum? I'm obviously, like, the thing is, I'm learning all the time. I mean, again, part of the reason that we did this is because in lockdown, I obviously fled back to Mum's house because I was like, if the world's going to end, I want to be with my mum. And so then we'd go on our, like, you're allowed like an hour walk a day. And so Mum lives around a lake, and we'd walk around the lake. And all we do is just talk about her work and everything that she does. And I think people who were walking past us must have just overheard our conversations and been like, what is going on over there? What are they talking about? But again, it's just because I'm so fascinated by it. So I know this is a massive cop-out of an answer, but again, like you talk about the sex ban thing. We've talked about so much about consent stuff. Like there's so many things, again, we talk about the generational stuff. Like some of the studies she'll read and some of the things she finds out about, like actually some of the most sexually adventurous people are like potentially women is post 80. Like that's a particular study, and it needs to be like peer reviewed and stuff. But Mum tells me these things, and I'm just like, this is absolutely incredible. And the majority of polyamorous people that she sees are over 60, that sort of stuff. All this stuff is incredible. So I know it's a massive cop out to say, oh, I learn everything every day, but like I do. Like this woman is someone who's a sex therapist at the very top of the game. So if you want to talk to someone about it, talk to her. And I luckily get to talk to her every day, so I learn so much.
Diggs. do you know actually when we used to talk when he was little, and I used to go off to work, and he would go to school on the train, and we'd be sitting on the train together chatting about these things. When I could get him off his phone, we'd be chatting, and quite often about sex. And I wonder now, people did give us funny looks, and I suppose he was quite a little boy. When he was about 11, he was quite small, and then there we were on the train chatting away, and sometimes people would join in, wouldn't they, Diggs? But
they would, yeah.
Sometimes they just look
that.
a little look a little surprised.
And
At
that
least-
also, sorry, and doing that in almost like in a public space, that also abolishes a lot of shame around sex. It becomes very, like matter of fact, and like there's no awkwardness. I think that a lot of people really struggle with talking about it in front of people, because of that fear, that shame, that embarrassment. We need to change the world, man.
We are.
We're changing the
That's what
world
you do.
slowly, podcast episode at a time.
Yeah.
So, on the subject of sex education, what do you think the flaws are in the main kind of sex education system at the moment, in your opinion?
It's a bit too much emphasis on reproduction rather than on relationships and what sex can be like. I think an awful lot of the people that have to deliver it are embarrassed about delivering it, didn't have a great sex education themselves. And they also split up boys and girls quite often, and they say, well, it's because the boys giggle. But I mean, I've done a little bit of sex education in schools, and I find if I put the boys and girls together, they giggle at the beginning, but they very quickly get very interested and ask really sensible questions, and they have really good conversations with one another. They learn about one another, and it really, really works. But and in a lot of schools, they split them up. And I think that's a shame. And Diggs is lucky because he's got a brother and two sisters. So, you've had someone to talk to throughout your life. But lots of children don't have a sibling of the opposite sex. So, so that would be good. What do you think,
Were you
Diggs?
all having...
Well, I was going to say that for me, one of the things as well is like what you said there, Mum. I remember at school, like a load of my friends had no idea about periods, and you're sort of like, well, like 50% of the girls in our class are, 50% of the people in our class are going through this, and you've just got no idea. But again, like Mum said, it's because in that lesson you were split up, and I understand there are arguments for splitting up like the kids because some people might be embarrassed and that sort of thing. So I do understand it, but if you're going to split them up, but teach them the exact same thing, because I feel like there's boys in my class who just had no idea about anything going on with that, like with periods, for example, and it's just stuff that they definitely could have known. And I remember speaking to one of my friends, and she was going out with some guy, and like this was in sixth form, so they're like 17, 18, and she was like, yeah, the other night he just asked me all these questions, and she had to educate him the whole thing on periods. And otherwise, what's left is you just have boys who go, ooh, periods, yucky. And that's just rubbish. But my other big stick on sex education, I think, is again, like Mum talks about relationships, so I think it's a really important point as well. And like relationship styles, we should definitely talk about that. But also talk about bodies a bit more, and particularly like female bodies, because the problem is these days you have a lot of this, like, I think a lot of girls, and do correct me if I'm wrong, I'm now speaking on behalf of women, but like there's a lot of like Instagram stuff that is like, you're showing the idea of the perfect body and all that sort of stuff, and like people are getting boob jobs, and they're getting labiaplasty done, and you sort of think to yourself, and I'm sure it's the same for some guys as well, but what I think would be so important is if you're just shown pictures of all the different types of boobs, all the different types of like vulvas and labia and vaginas, and guys like penises and balls and all that sort of stuff as well, just showing the different bodies, teach people about the different relationship styles, like all of that stuff just will hopefully normalize it all, so you don't look at your body and go, oh god, this needs changing, it's not perfect, because everyone's is already perfect already. So I think that needs to be done as well.
Yeah, that would be incredible, wouldn't it, if we got shown all of that.
That would have changed so much, and they're not obsessed with all the media and the magazines and the models and everything we see.
And porn.
And porn. Porn was evil. It tainted the way that I saw arousal and bodies, and I think did that for so many others too. And like, as much as there is the emphasis on women's bodies, I think a lot of men, people, penis owners, suffer too, and that's also something we talk about less. But it's almost like, even more shameful for a man to talk about it. It's almost a bit more embraced at the moment that women can.
Well, I guess if you're only talking about like sex as in like sex and the erection and the male ejaculation and that being kind of like the main part of it, it suddenly puts this like massive pressure on men to be the performer, to be the person that is the sex. And that's a huge problem when it comes to like, I guess it's toxic masculinity, really, isn't it? It's just like, it kind of comes into that whole conversation. But yeah, did you ever feel any of that pressure after learning stuff in sex education? Well, I guess you probably didn't because your mum.
No, but it definitely still finds its way in, and definitely, and I think that's the case for a lot of men. I mean, Mum and I have talked about this before. I think we had Kate Moyle, who I'm not sure whether you guys have had on your podcast, but she's another sex therapist. Yeah, I thought so. And she was saying that, you know, one of the big things that she sees in young men at the moment is this performance anxiety. And I think, like, through porn, through all this sort of stuff, like you say, you're the one expected to perform. And it was like what Mum was saying earlier about how, you know, sometimes we sort of like, we start having sex and we're so focused on orgasm or making the other person orgasm that we're not really sure about what's going on in between. And it sounds mad to say that because you're like, well, of course you must because you're orgasming. But actually, you don't stop to think, what do I actually find pleasurable? I know what I can do to get to this end goal of making them orgasm or me orgasm or whatever, but that's all just performance mode. It's not actually pleasure mode. I'm not actually checking with myself and being like, this feels good, and like sitting in it. And I think a lot of men have that, and they're so busy about like getting an erection, keeping it, making sure they're doing. And I think that definitely, despite, you know, having the lucky upbringing and sex education I had, that still creeps in even now.
If people were talking about sex earlier in schools and things like that, and if you were seeing, you know, pictures of vulvas and penises and things, and it was all pretty standard stuff and run of the mill and wasn't exceptional and something to giggle about, then people wouldn't need all these, you know, sensationalist magazines. They wouldn't need to be educated through porn. They'd already feel they'd got access to information, and they'd know how to go about finding proper information that wasn't sensational. Because I think a lot of magazines especially have given the impression that women are entitled to an orgasm, and that men ought to be giving them one. And so men are now very focused on it. And what that has now done has created response pressure in women because they feel they have to please their partner by orgasming. So now you've got everybody under pressure. So when you say, right, you can't talk to one another, you keep a poker face, don't let on if you're enjoying it, if you can. I mean, obviously, if you've got a huge erection, it's pretty obvious. But anyway, but they manage that somehow. But you know, that not talking means that you have to take care of yourself and take responsibility for your own pleasure, and then help your partner to know what you like. And that comes a bit later on. But people don't do that. They just think, right, it's my responsibility, I've got to get on with it. And that's what they're focused on. And it takes all the fun out of it. Yeah.
So how can we help educate our friends? You know, say if there's someone who doesn't have a sex podcast, who is finding that their friends are asking them questions. I mean, what good can we do? How can we teach other people? How can we teach ourselves?
I think you're doing it. I mean, if you're comfortable talking about it, then you're modelling really good communication, aren't you? And information giving, and that's really what we need to do. We need to be able to do it without sniggering about it. Don't you, Diggs?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Also, I mean, obviously, you have a podcast, and I feel like a lot of this learning, some of it, I think, has to be done in their own time as well. Obviously, you can talk to them as much as you want, and like if you do talk openly and stuff about sex, amazing. Because like as we were saying before, we're not really sure how many people do as much as we do. Because obviously we love it, but like some people maybe a bit more scared about it. And it's funny. I don't know if you guys found the same, but since starting the podcast, people will come up to me more than I think other people and be like, hey, by the way, this is going on in my relationship, or hey, by the way, you know, this sort of thing. So I think we're already doing it that way. Definitely. But also by having a podcast, people can go and do their own learning in their own time. And hopefully we're proud of the work we do, and we hope that people, I called it work then, that was kind of disgusting. I'm proud of the podcast that we make and the fun we have on it. And hopefully like there's some good information on there at the same time. And there's loads of them out there. So it's not even just ours. And so people can go away. But as long as we're like still pushing these things and being like, hey, I found some great stuff on here and I found some good stuff there, they can do it in their own time as well.
What are, like, as a sex therapist, what would you say are the most common things that people are coming to you for, and that people are kind of like the biggest taboos and struggles of, you know, the human race when it comes to sex?
Well, people's libidos differ, they say. Sometimes people have, I have a high sex drive, but my partner has a low sex drive. That's very common. Losing desire, having no time for sex, as well as things like problems with erections or not being able to come when you want to, those sorts of things are really, really common. But the biggest thing is people beating themselves up because they're not having enough sex, and they don't even necessarily want to, but they feel they ought to, and so they're worried about that. And actually, when you look at their lives are just too busy. They're either too big, and it's fine when they go on holiday quite often, but while they're at home and they're really busy and the children are around and all sorts of things, work, there's just no time for it. And actually part of sex therapy is finding the best times for intimacy, whether that means sex or whether it means just being together and feeling close.
Well, we're part of that problem because Florence and I have the sex podcast where we do glorify sex and we talk about it and we want it all the time, and we don't say to our listeners enough, like, you know, we have high libidos and that's the way things are, and you know, we try really hard to be as honest as possible, but I also think part of what we do can be damaging for people that hear it, that's hear our amazing sex lives or whatever we're going through and think, oh, you know, there's something wrong with me because I'm not having that. So yeah, that's been like a massive learning point. We can't just like brag about the sex. It's like trying really hard to
be honest.
Yeah, to be honest. It's not about sex positivity, it's about sex honesty.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
So yeah, that's hard to do, and all we want to do is talk about how
Great the sex is.
Yeah, how
I'm
great the
definitely
sex
not
is.
having great
Well,
sex.
why not? I mean, you know, it's great. I mean, I think it's good to know that people are, because you can end up with you can end up feeling that it's always a struggle, because people do talk to their friends and they all say, oh dear, you know, I'm my partner's pestering, or I'm too tired. And actually, not everybody is too tired. Not everybody is struggling. Sometimes it goes well. And what tends to happen is that people go through periods when it's not going so well, and then it picks up again. And that's what we need to remember.
Do you think, where is the outside pressure coming from, do you think, when it comes to like pressure to have loads of sex?
Well, everybody believes that everybody else is having loads of sex, and then they start talking to friends, and the friends say, "Oh no, it's all awful. It's all you know, I've got a problem." Then the other person's got a problem. So you tend to listen to your tribe, and then there's what you see on TV. There's you know, a lot in magazines. People pretending that they're having great sex when they're actually not. There's a lot of shame involved in saying, oh, I don't have sex very often, or it's not very good. So yeah, it's difficult. And there's also a lot of judgment. I mean, people do accuse other people of being slutty or whatever. And there's absolutely no reason why you shouldn't really enjoy feeling like a sexual human being. That's absolutely great. But people close it down because they think, oh, it's not appropriate, or somebody will judge me. And that's a real shame.
What's your favourite thing about sex, both of you?
Oh, nice.
Favourite thing.
There's so much, bro. It's too hard.
Well, I mean, what element? Yeah, do you know what? I mean, personally, I would say that it's a unique form of connection. There is nothing else where you can feel that connected to somebody. So, which is a lovely, lovely thing. But that's not. I mean, if you're thinking in terms of a sex act or something, there's just so many to choose from.
No, I think what you said was perfect.
Yeah. And I love blowjobs. No, I don't know. No, I don't know. I mean, it's really boring, but I'm just thinking then. But it's just a bit exciting, isn't it? It's just really exciting. It's exciting to talk about. Exciting to do. It's just exciting to think about. You know, I love it. It's great.
It's just great.
It really is.
It's just great. Sex is just great.
That's why everyone is here listening to this right now.
And that's why
they think sex is great.
That's why everyone should go to therapy and sex therapy so they can have great sex. This is what therapized sex sounds like.
Yes. Exactly. Well, it's been such a pleasure having you both on. Where can our curious fuckers find you, find your podcast, find your therapy skills?
Right.
Well, I can answer the podcast stuff. So we're everywhere.
Yeah.
We're it's the Real Sex Education on Spotify, Apple, you name it. We're out there. And then we're on Twitter and Instagram at Real Sex Ed Pod. and our own. I think you're at Kate Campbell on Instagram, and I'm at Diggory on Twitter on Instagram as well. But then in terms of the therapy stuff, Mum, you'll be able to take that better than I can.
Well, I mean, you can find a sex therapist by just Googling sex therapy, and the College of Sexual and Relationship Therapists has its own index of therapists who are accredited, and you can just Google away, and you'll soon find a sex therapist. It's not difficult.
Amazing. Well, thank you both so much. Thank you everyone for listening to this episode. Share it far and wide so that we can educate everyone around the world on sex and everything like that.
Yeah, this episode's been incredible. We've learned so much. And of course, if you want to keep up to date with Come Curious, find us on Instagram at Come Curious, as well as our personal accounts, Florence Bark and Reed Amber X.
And we will see you next Thursday.
See you next Thursday. Bye.